Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Wednesday, December 20th, 2023. This is The Excerpt. Today, a court says former President Donald Trump has been disqualified from the 2024 primary ballot in Colorado. Plus, we hear the latest from Republicans' impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden, and we discuss the sexual assault of hostages in Gaza. Colorado's Supreme Court yesterday ruled that former President Donald Trump may not appear on the state's presidential primary ballot next year. It's the first time a court has embraced the theory that he disqualified himself from a second term by attempting to overturn the 2020 election. The Colorado court voted 4-3 and said it would stay its own ruling until January, giving Trump time to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. Trump is almost certain to do so, which would put a historic question before the nation's highest court. At issue is the wording of the Constitution's insurrection clause and whether the former president incited an insurrection when his supporters stormed the Capitol on January 6, 2021. A Colorado district judge last month held that Trump engaged in an insurrection by inciting the mob that stormed the Capitol, but that the provision of the 14th Amendment that disqualifies certain officials involved with insurrection did not apply to a president. The Colorado Supreme Court has now reversed that. The Colorado court is the first to rule explicitly against Trump on the issue. Courts in several other states, including Minnesota, Michigan, and New Hampshire, have shot down similar legal claims in recent weeks. Republican investigators leading the impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden interviewed another witness yesterday as they hunt for evidence showing that Biden financially benefited from his family's business dealings. The committee interviewed Carol Fox, a trustee for AmeriCorps, the now bankrupt healthcare company. She was asked about her knowledge of the president's brother, James Biden, and a $600,000 loan given to him by AmeriCorps. According to three sources with direct knowledge of the interview, Fox said she had no knowledge that the president was directly involved with those dealings. AmeriCorps gave James Biden the loan after he made a promise to the financially struggling company that he could secure funding from the Middle East by leveraging his family name. Fox identified no services that James Biden ever provided to AmeriCorps. After he did not follow through on that promise, Fox filed a lawsuit against him. The two parties eventually agreed on a $350,000 settlement. Before we get to this next story, a warning that the following interview references explicit acts of sexual violence. Doctors who have been treating released hostages from Hamas captivity say that some suffered violent sexual assaults while they were held captive. I spoke with USA Today World Affairs correspondent Hjelmgaard for more. Kim, always good to have you on. Thanks for making the time.
Thanks for having me.
So what do we know about the sexual assault that some of these hostages suffered?
So the thing I want to say at the top is that this is like an extremely sensitive story. Allegations of sexual assault always need to be treated with kid gloves. You know, a lot of the information is in flux around this topic, and so we need to be super careful. And I think that's really important to kind of stress at the outset. But I think what we can say with some confidence is that slowly over time, we're getting more and more of a picture about what appears to have happened to some of the released hostages while they were being held by Hamas. A lot of this information comes from some of the doctors that have been treating them, also from the Israeli authorities. The main thing we can say is that the hostages went through a lot of different types of trauma. There was an abuse, there was food being withheld, there was medicines being withheld, there was different sort of psychological, for lack of a better word, torture involved. And in terms of sexual assault, we do have to be somewhat careful because the evidence on this is still emerging. But what some of the doctors that have been treating these freed hostages have told me, they're fairly confident that the majority of these women have been assaulted in some fashion, and that there is severe sexual assault, rape involved. The reason I'm being so careful in the way that we describe this is because these doctors are also very sort of deliberate and careful to point out that the evidence for sexual assault really does take time to emerge. And so in the sort of collective public imagination, there may be some thoughts that there would be obvious physical signs of this abuse that these hostages have come back with. But it really is evidence, testimony from what they're being told that is coming out in kind of fits and starts. And so the doctors that I've been talking to for this story, they believe that many of the women between early teens and mid to late 40s were sexually assaulted in some fashion.
Kim, can we expect any independent investigation into this? I know the UN Commissioner for Human Rights has claimed that Israel blocked his team's investigators.
So in terms of the independent investigations that many people have called for into this area, a lot of that is pointed directly at October 7th in terms of the evidence that there is. And I have to say, the sort of physical forensic evidence around that event is far more clear in terms of the abuse that went on. There's photographic evidence, there's video evidence. Some of this video evidence and photographic evidence is from Hamas itself. And then in terms of the physical forensic evidence, the bodies, and the conditions that the bodies were left in. Many of these bodies were mutilated. Many of these bodies had obvious signs of sexual assault, genital mutilation. We're talking about clothing that was ripped. And an independent investigation into that evidence is what the UN has been asking for. For one reason or another, Israel has been reluctant to let those sort of investigators have access to the evidence. And it kind of relates to some mistrust from Israel about the UN, whether it is kind of truly independent when it comes to Israel. The UN, of course, completely rejects that idea.
The Biden administration has really been trying to toe a line in this conflict. Are we hearing from them at all about this sexual violence we've been talking about?
Yes, President Biden and others in the U.S. administration have been calling for this evidence to be taken seriously, for there to be, more discussion around this evidence, and frankly, for Israeli women to be believed on this topic. And one of the difficulties is that many of the women who were abused by Hamas on that day, they're all dead. There's virtually no women who survived those attacks who have been able to come forward to give their testimony to investigators, to Israeli investigators, to say what happened. Over the last few weeks, there has been a little bit of testimony from some people who survived, men mostly, who overheard things that were happening on that day or were witness to it in some form. But in terms of the many, many women who were abused and killed on October 7th, they are not here to provide that evidence.
And Kim, have we heard any response from Hamas about this?
On one side of their mouth, they deny that sexual assaults took place. At the same time, some of their political leaders have said at various times over the last several months that they want to see an October 7th type attack happen again and again and again. Over the last couple of days, Israel has published a little bit of testimony that it has received from captured Hamas fighters, in which these Hamas people acknowledged that they were under instructions to sort of do whatever they wanted to the civilian population in these areas, and indeed to carry out sexual assault.
Kim Hjelmgaard covers world news for USA Today. Thank you, Kim.
Thanks for having me.
If you are a survivor of sexual assault, RAIN offers support through the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 800-656-HOPE and online at online.rainn.org. The winter season's first significant storm is set to drench Southern California over the next few days, bringing heavy rain and flooding threats to millions. It's the region's first El Niño-influenced storm of the season, one that's fueled by an atmospheric river of moisture, according to the National Weather Service. AccuWeather forecasters said it's expected to be the biggest rainstorm for the area since Hurricane Hilary dumped up to half a foot of rain in August. A flood watch will be in effect this time for some 22 million people. And today is Go Caroling Day, a time to spread some holiday cheer from door to door. And before we go, stay tuned at 4 p.m. for my colleague Dana Taylor's special episode on social justice activist Adi Barkan's remarkable life and impact. Adi passed away from ALS last month at the age of 39. Thanks for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio, And if you use a smart speaker, just ask for The Excerpt. I'm back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.